it's an image that um, containing text that I wrote in 2018, August 8th, 2018, called "Make Vancouver Canadian Again." I'm going to read it sentence by sentence, but then I'm going to comment. So I'll read a sentence or maybe two sentences from what I wrote in 2018, and then I will comment, because there's been a lot of it's provoked a lot of reaction, and there's been a lot of misunderstanding of what I'm saying in it. So let me just try to explain more of what I had in mind when I was writing this. Um, okay, so it's called "Make Vancouver Canadian Again." Obviously, that is a play on Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again." I wrote this in the summer of 2018, during the mayoral election for Vancouver. So the city of Vancouver was having a big election for who was going to replace the mayor, the outgoing mayor of Gregor Robertson, and also all the other city council members. Like, it was a city council election, and quite a contentious one, because there was going to be a shift in power. And it was 2018, so it was in the Trump era, and all the candidates. There were so many mayoral candidates. It was like such a huge list. It was kind of a joke. But they were all coming out with their slogans, right? And so I commented somewhere on the internet, here's what would be my slogan if I was running, but I'm not running, so anybody who is running is free to use this. That is what I said, and you don't even have to pay me royalties. You can have it. Nobody took me up on my offer, but that was the spirit. Okay, so that's what was behind the original. My hair is so annoying. That was what was behind the original "Make Vancouver Canadian Again" idea, just with that slogan in itself. And then this is expanding upon this thing that I wrote in August 2018, is expanding upon that. Okay, and now today I'm going to expand on what I wrote. Okay, so here we go. Trump is an American patriot and a beacon of hope to all around the Western world who cherish truth, liberty, and God. I am a Canadian whose ancestors go back 400 years in Canada and the USA, and who is a direct descendant of Samuel Purdy of the Purdy House in White Plains, New York, and the Planters. Okay, so let me expand on that. So Samuel Purdy, like, I traced my genealogy, and this is through on my dad's side. And his family has lived in New Westminster, BC, going back to the 1800s. Okay, and there was only a few families here at that time, and the Purdy family was one of them. And so I come from that family, among others, in New Westminster in the 1800s. And the Canadian ones, the ones in Vancouver, in New Westminster, would come from this guy, and I believe New West, BC, Canada, via California. But then his ancestors, like, I've traced his ancestry back, all the way back to this guy, Samuel Purdy, who, during the American Revolution, okay, had George Washington used it as the headquarters for the American Revolution for a time. Put it on Wikipedia, and it's a tourist site. I've never been there. I've never been to New York, but I've looked about it on the internet when I found out that I have this ancestral connection. And so that was one of my great grandfather's houses, and it was used as the headquarters for the American Revolution. So it just goes to show that I have American Revolutionary blood flowing through my veins. Okay? And yeah. And I guess also I wanted to say it. I guess it's also an example of how lots of the people who come from New Westminster. Okay, so this is something you have to understand. Vancouver, there's not very many people who are from Vancouver. Period. Like who from a long time back, who for many generations. Most people are quite relative newcomers, either immigrants themselves or first generation, second generation. Whereas I'm like sixth generation, which is unusual. But the thing is, there was in the old days, like back in the 1800s, there was Vancouver and there was New Westminster, and they were two separate cities. And New Westminster was bigger, and it was actually the capital for a while of the province. And New Westminster was more working class and more American. So there were a lot of Americans who settled in New Westminster at that time. And generally they would have been coming this way following the gold rush from California. Okay, and that would have been the case with my ancestor, Reuben Purdy. So just a little bit of background. Okay, so people think, and I guess just that would be important as to, like, because people think there's such a huge difference between Canadians and Americans, but really, like, when I talk about my American cousins, like, I'm not just using that as just throwing that term around. Like, it literally is true. Like, I must have distant cousins all across the United States. And, okay, whereas historically, so that's New Westminster, had more of an American past, and Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, had more of an upper class British past, okay? So that is just, there's this historic distinction, and it's carried all the way through, even to now. There's like, I mean, there's a huge... I'm going to get into completely off topic if I start talking about that. But it informs urban geography and urban politics in Metro Vancouver to this day. This split between Vancouver and like New Westminster, also throwing into that Surrey and like the edge edge suburbs. Okay. I don't want to get off topic. Let me get back to my Make Vancouver Canadian again. Okay, so just, yeah, and also the planters. So I have ancestors of the planters. Those were like basically pilgrims. I have ancestors from all over Canada, including French from Quebec, Irish from Ontario, and Ukrainian from Manitoba. My grandfather fought in World War II, the big one, as Archie Bunker would say. And I was mocked online for saying that. Like, when I first posted this on Twitter, I remember that was one of the things that people attacked, like, oh, you're quoting Archie Bunker unironically. Okay, yeah, well, Archie Bunker is a big figure of pop culture, and I'm just talking about, and I was referencing him as a symbol of the white working class. Okay. Corrupt politicians have turned Vancouver into a world mecca for money laundering through casinos and real estate. The money never stops pouring in from China, inflating real estate far beyond what local people can afford. Absolutely, right? Absolutely proven. That's the reason why there's a public inquiry going on into this in BC right now. And that public inquiry has come about because of the political raising this issue, okay? It was something that you couldn't even talk about. It took a long time before they got to a public inquiry stage. You couldn't even talk about it for many years due to political correctness. And that's harmed people with the housing crisis. And notice, for anyone who would say that I'm being racist by making this point with China, notice where I locate, like I locate the responsibility in my statement is with the politicians. I said, corrupt politicians have turned Vancouver into a world mecca for money laundering through real estate and casinos. Right. So ultimately the blame would lie with Canadian politicians. So if there's people internationally taking advantage of that situation, I mean, that's not good, but that's the blame is with our leaders, okay? So I'm not being racist by saying that. Now, Canadians may not have the same constitutional rights as Americans, but we do enjoy the same culture of liberty and freedom of speech and respect for common law and tradition, or at least we used to enjoy it before it came under attack from globalism and political correctness. I descend from the pilgrims and settlers and explorers who built the USA and Canada, beacons of freedom and prosperity in the Western tradition. Right. And there's people who say that I should be ashamed of that. And why should I be? Why should I be ashamed of my ancestors? Okay. And Canada and the USA truly are beacons of freedom and prosperity in the Western tradition. Now, the freedom and the prosperity may be waning in recent years, but that is what the United States in particular has represented historically through the 20th century in particular, that it's this beacon of freedom and prosperity. That's why it's a place that attracts so many immigrants from all around the world, including my ancestors as well. That would be the reason why people have been coming here. Okay, and I have been rendered a serf in my own city and country because a cabal of corrupt politicians decided to sell the land from under my feet to China. Right, and that is not right. Like, I'm speaking to an really profound injustice. And it's not just about me. I'm just an example. I mean, this would have been happening to everyone. Like I said, inflating real estate beyond what local people can afford. So that's basically all local people. Not just me. I'm just speaking about myself because I'm not going to be sharing another person's business without getting a signed consent research form or something. You know, like, I'm giving my anecdotal qualitative experience because that's what I can draw upon. But there are many people who have been harmed by the housing crisis in British Columbia. And the international aspect from foreign investment, from China in particular, other countries as well, is only one dimension of it. Okay, there are other factors that go into that as well that make housing so unaffordable in Vancouver. That's not the only one. So just to say that out of fairness, but I am talking about that, but that doesn't mean that I think that that's the only causal factor. There's many factors like interest rates. Okay, so going on. And when I tried to speak out about it, they said I was acting entitled. That's in quotations. Literally, that was the wording. I was entitled and racist. And the land never belonged to me in the first place because it is the unceded territory of Salish First Nations who traditionally occupied these lands. Okay, this is what was going on the internet for years when I was trying to raise these issues. I would be called entitled. What makes you think that you would be so entitled to be able to own a home or even just rent a home or be able to live in your city where you work and where you lived your whole life and where your family's from? Why should you feel so entitled to that? Well, I think everyone should be entitled. Like, I'm not saying I'm entitled to a mansion or some glorious grand place, but yeah, I think everyone should be entitled to have a roof over their head, in particular when you're working and you do have an income and you could be working your butt off, which I have for most of my life. So, you know, and so yeah, I guess I am entitled, but shouldn't I be? And 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 also to the left, people think that I'm always coming from the right wing these days, like I'm this huge Trump supporter. That would have been being called entitled would have been something that right wing conservatives would have been saying. Like a lot of this stuff with the housing crisis and was justified by the right wing. Just so you know, like I was fighting the right wing. And being called entitled and racist, yeah, by the right wing and by the left. And that the land never belonged to me because it belongs to the natives who traditionally lived here. Well, so shouldn't I, like, I'm acknowledging in that sentence right there that the land, that it is the unceded land of the Salish First Nations. So I'm not disputing that when I'm writing this. I'm just saying, yeah, that's the situation. Okay, so where does that leave someone like me? Shouldn't I have a place to belong as well? I mean, it's not like I can go back to Europe. There's no Europe for me to, like, my ancestors have been in North America for 400 years. I have nothing to do with it. Like, shouldn't I have a country and a place to be where I have a valid claim to, like, that I should have a home or that I should be on the receiving end of some social contract? Shouldn't I, like, that's the point that I'm trying to make with that. I'm not trying to take away from Native people, okay? I'm acknowledging that the Salish First Nations, that this is their unceded territory. I'm acknowledging that when I'm saying that. Because it is, like, I'm saying it in the present tense. Yeah. Said I was acting entitled and racist and the land never belonged to me in the first place because it is the unceded territory of Salish First Nations who traditionally occupied these lands. Okay. They said I had no right to country or home. Right? That's the point I'm making, and it's a profound point. They brought in loads of immigrants from all around the world, many from countries that hate each other and continue their battles here in Canada. So, I'm not making a statement against immigrants when I'm saying this, okay? That is the truth, is that when you there are many people in different parts of this world who don't get along. And when your country is open up to such huge numbers of immigration as Canada is, like 400,000, huge numbers. Canada takes in per capita the highest numbers of immigration, I believe, in the world. If it's not the highest, it's certainly up there. And when you take in, and from all around the world, so many different people from all around the world, these people are not all going to get along with each other. They don't all get along with each other outside of Canada. I mean, it's not about Canada. So that can continue here in Canada. And indeed it has. There's been many examples. The point of this video is not to go into that. I could make a separate video about that. But that's what I'm talking about with that. So, but that doesn't mean to say, because some people read this and think that I'm against immigration or that I'm against immigrants. No, I'm not. I'm against it being at such a huge level as it is. And I think there needs to be consideration for the local people and the impacts. So I'm against the approach that's been taken. But that doesn't mean that I am against immigration outright, or that I would have a problem with immigrant people. Absolutely not. Like, I don't have a problem with any people. I'm nice to all people. Okay? Like, I'm surrounded by immigrants all the time. So if I was gonna have a problem with immigrants, like, that would be it wouldn't be possible. And my my own family. My grandmother is an immigrant from Scotland. So, it's not about being against immigrants per se. It's about getting the policy right and getting the numbers right and being considerate of the impacts on the local population. All right, continuing on. The youngest child in my family is the only white kid in the class and doesn't understand why he can't wear a turban like all the other boys in class. That is true. And I'm trying to speak to a situation. People have a hard time with this one too. And I believe this kid and the kids in this school situation, they've worked it out. So the kids have worked it out. A situation that adults can't even handle talking about. But the kids have been left on their own to work it out. And I guess that struck a chord with me because I know something about what that is like. I have firsthand experience with that. Something like that. Not quite like that. Myself growing up. I wasn't the only white kid in the class, but I would have been one of the only, like I guess I was a minority. And I think among the boys, I remember most of the time I would have been like one of maybe two white boys. Everybody else was Chinese from Hong Kong. So there were no turbans. It's not quite the same thing. Okay, but I understand something about what that is like, and there's an aspect to do with gender and being a boy, right? So to be a boy, part of being a boy in Sikh culture, part of being a man, part of being masculine is to wear a turban. And so if that's your cultural environment but you cannot wear a turban because of your race, and that's because that's not your culture, that's not your religion, even though that's the predominant environment that you may be in. Well, that's going to make that kid to really feel left out, excluded, and question about even maybe about his gender, about like, well, am I really a real boy, a real man? That's the point that I'm driving at there. And the fact that the kids have to deal with it all on their own, and the adults can't even, besides me, can't even handle talking about it or even acknowledging that this is going on. Like, wow. And like, and it's like, so how do you handle that situation? Does the kid wear a turban? Because then he's going to be criticized for cultural appropriation. And a turban, truly, especially when worn by Sikhs, is a religious thing. So if you're not from that religion, like, I don't know, I'm not going to take a stand on that and say you can't wear a turban, but it's not obvious to me that that is the answer. I'm just raising the question, like, what is the answer? Okay, can we talk about this? I don't like that's kind of where I'm going with this. Can we like talk about it to try to figure out maybe what the answer should be? Okay. So I supported Trump because he is the last chance for the West to push back against this evil globalism. Yeah. Yeah. Trump will let you at least talk about it. Or he'll go there, So that's the thing, is we need space to talk about these issues. And political correctness is so stifling that you can't talk about it, you can't resolve it, you can't. And that is why I support Maxime Bernier in his courageous stand against the corrupt leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, Andrew Scheer, who is a self-described feminist beholden to the dairy industry in Quebec. MAGA, MCGA, and BCA. So this was written in 2018 in a political context. This was written when Maxime Bernier was deciding whether or not to separate from the Conservative Party and create his own new party, which eventually he did do. He did do around that time, and then it was called the People's Party of Canada, and I was encouraging Maxime Bernier to do that, and so that was the context that I was writing that in, and to clarify, yeah, so Andrew Scheer, a self-described feminist beholden to the dairy industry in Quebec. I don't necessarily think it's bad to be a feminist. I've sometimes called myself a feminist in the past. I'm not running to be the leader of I'm not the leader of the Conservative Party. There's a difference. Canada doesn't want a feminist to be the leader of the Conservative Party. They want a conservative. That's the point. Okay? So that's not necessarily, like, yeah, I have a big criticism of feminism, but I'm not saying that feminism outright, completely across the board, is wrong. Because I've borrowed from feminist ideology in my thesis. Like, no, it's like I could be a feminist according to some understandings of that word. So I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing to be a feminist, but I'm just saying, you know, the whole thing, I don't even think Andrew Scheer is a feminist. It's just like he has to call himself that because he wants to check the box of virtue signaling. And that's the point. It's fake. And that's not what Canada needs in our political leaders. So that was the point that I was making there. And that's the reason why I was supporting Maxime Bernier at that time. Okay? This was written in 2018. And it was written in a political context. Obviously, times have changed. I'm not even so much of a big gung-ho Trump supporter anymore because he's really disappointed in many ways. So, although I'm still sympathetic to the MAGA movement, the people in it widely, broadly speaking, I'm not really out campaigning for Trump. Okay, but I did at the time, and I'm unrepentant of it, and I think that people should be allowed to wear MAGA hats without being attacked. You know, I was appalled at the violence that I saw coming from the left at that time, and I've always been somebody who's walked away from violence, do not stand for violence at all, and so anytime a situation goes violent, I'm out of there. And that was a pushing factor for me to walk away from the left. Because before all this, I was supporting the NDP and leftist parties my whole life. Okay? So that's the situation. And everything I'm writing in that thing, Make Vancouver Canadian Again, is true. And I'm talking about Make It Canadian Again also in case sometimes people think I mean Make It White Again. That's not what I'm saying, because it was never an all-white city. There's always been Chinese people living in Vancouver and New Westminster since the 1800s, when my ancestors were here, and Native people. Okay, so why would I be thinking to make it white again? Like, that wouldn't even make sense because it was never an all-white city. And if you're thinking that by me saying Make Vancouver Canadian Again means that I'm saying make it white again, that means that you think that being Canadian is equated to being white. That's not what I'm saying. Okay? I'm talking about Canadian in the sense of culture, of a Western liberal, in the classical sense of the word, a Western classical liberal culture. That's what I mean by Canadian. Okay, so freedom of speech would be a huge core Canadian value. I'm talking about Canadian values. And I'm also talking about, there's a subtext to this because I'm talking also about the foreign ownership from Chinese investors of the real estate. So literally owned by Canadians. Okay, because when your city, so much of your city is owned by people on the other side of the planet just as an investment, well, that we've seen how that really creates a devastating situation for people living here of all races, in terms of housing. So, and when I wrote this, I believed that, like, it's not just housing, it was also commercial real estate. So, Anbang Insurance, which is the state-owned insurance company of China, owned by the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing, owned the Bentall Towers in Vancouver, which would be the main office towers in Vancouver. They essentially owned the downtown business district in Vancouver when I wrote this. The government of China did. So, yeah, make Vancouver Canadian again in terms of its culture and values, and literally in terms of who is owning it. That is what I mean by that. It's not about being racist or to say that it should be an all-white city or make it white again. That's not what I was saying. It wouldn't make sense to say that because it was never an all-white city. Okay? And so that's it. And I don't deserve the absolute hate and pushback that I have received. I don't deserve, well, pushback is one thing, but I don't deserve the hate and intolerance and discrimination and censorship that I have experienced as a large part of writing this. This has been a large part of it. So that's my little explanation. Not so little. This is 32 minutes. I better wrap this up. I'm starting to get hungry now. That's my explanation of what the thinking process was behind when I wrote Make Vancouver Canadian Again in 2018. All right. Peace out, everyone. Have a good day. Hi, YouTube world. So I'm doing this live stream because I just did a live stream on Rumble of my latest YouTube videos. And quite a few people were watching. And but I just think it's ironic that I'm allowed to stream on Rumble my videos that are on YouTube, but I'm not allowed to stream on YouTube my videos that are on YouTube. I mean, what's up with that? Right? Because the last time I did a live stream on YouTube of my videos that were already on YouTube, a countdown of the most popular ones, it was stopped midway through the stream, YouTube saying because it's copyrighted. Just about all of my videos on YouTube are copyrighted, but when I upload them to YouTube, YouTube indicates that those are videos that the copyright owner has allowed to be on YouTube. So that's how they got to be on YouTube in the first place. So I don't know why YouTube has a problem with it when those very same content that's already on there that they've told me is allowed to be on there is part of a live stream. Then all hell breaks loose. They cut the live stream, and any future live streams that I attempted to do, they weren't even allowing me to update the thumbnail image. And so for a while I was stuck with the thumbnail image that said YouTube sucks, which was the one that I had prior to this, for the video live stream I did prior to this all happening. And they wouldn't let me change it without doing a two-step verification involving my phone number that is not easy for me to do because my phone number has changed as a result of my divorce. So that's how I got locked out of my first YouTube channel. Anyways, so this is all pretty crazy, but I can still stream my YouTube videos on Rumble, but I can't stream my YouTube videos on YouTube for anything that's copyrighted. Okay. So, but I don't want to leave YouTube out, right? So I did a live stream on Rumble. I think I should do a live stream on YouTube as well. So what am I going to put in this live stream? I'm not allowed to put in my videos that are already on YouTube because they're copyrighted, even though YouTube said that they're allowed to be on there. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. So I can only basically safely within following the community guidelines of YouTube, I can only live stream content that is entirely copyright free. All right. So that pretty much leaves the stuff, my political, social commentary in my Tommy Talks playlist. So I just didn't want to leave YouTube out. Since I did a Rumble live stream of YouTube videos, now I'm going to do a YouTube live stream of copyright-free content that is also incidentally already on YouTube. Okay, and this one is called Indigenous Privilege. So here we go. YouTube world. So I'm doing this live stream to talk about something controversial. Now, I've never been someone to back away from the controversial, although lately I have kind of not really been diving right into controversial subjects because I'm trying to keep in a positive mindset. Okay, and sometimes controversial subjects can bring my mood down. So I'm trying to not let that happen. But it can't be an absolute. Sometimes all controversy cannot be avoided. We live in a world where things are contested and controversy surrounds us. So it can't be completely avoided. And I don't think it's beneficial ultimately to completely avoid all controversy. So here I am diving headlong into a very controversial topic. I'm going to start by just reading this news article, and then I'm going to give you my comments after I'm finished reading it. So this was in the Vancouver Sun earlier this year on January 19th, 2023. There's been a lot of reports about this particular case. So this is not the only article, but this is the one I've selected to read for today. So the headline says, "Retired Senator Stunned by Reports About Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond's Heritage." Okay, so that Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, the article is probably going to say it, but I'll just say it right now. She was a high-profile advocate for kids in care, kids in foster care in the province of British Columbia in Canada. Okay, and this is a senator, so talking. So the former senator, a Cree and Chinese Canadian, says she celebrated as Turpel-Lafond became Saskatchewan's first Indigenous female judge in 1998. Okay, so before she was this advocate for kids in care in BC, Turpel-Lafond became the first supposedly Indigenous female judge in 1998 in the province of Saskatchewan. Okay, so she did other things in her career before she came to BC. So here it is. Here's the article. Retired Senator Lillian Dick said she was stunned to see reports last fall questioning the Indigenous heritage of former Judge Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, whose story she had related to and whose career she had celebrated. Past tense. Dick, who is Cree and Chinese Canadian, said Thursday she thought hallelujah as Turpel-Lafond became Saskatchewan's first Indigenous female judge in 1998. It was wonderful to know Turpel-Lafond had overcome the numerous challenges Indigenous women disproportionately face in their personal lives and careers, said the professor emeritus in psychiatry at the University of Saskatchewan. And then I found out it was all a facade. Dick said a CBC investigation convinced her that Turpel-Lafond lied about being Indigenous, specifically Cree, causing real harm by exploiting the identity of Indigenous women, of whom many in Canada are underserved and vulnerable. Canadians know now Indigenous women are more likely to face violence, more likely to be murdered, made missing, and she's used that identity to enhance her curriculum vitae. And to me, that was like the lowest thing you could do. Dick is among the signatories of a statement released this week calling on 10 universities to revoke the honorary degrees conferred on Turpel-Lafond. 8 of the 10 schools 8 of the 10 schools the Indigenous Women's Collective singled out have confirmed they're taking steps to review the matter, while 2 have yet to respond to requests for comment sent Wednesday. Dick said she read the citations linked to the honorary degrees, many of which mentioned Turpel Lafond's supposed lived experiences as an Indigenous person. She looks as though she's really risen to the top, despite all the barriers people like myself have had to face, said Dick, whose mother's government-recognized Cree status was stripped from her when she married Dick's Chinese father. The appropriation of Indigenous identity by so-called pretendians deprives Indigenous people of jobs and opportunities to make change for the better, Dick said, adding that it also affects future generations of Indigenous children. The Indigenous Women's Collective says its members want to ensure their children's and grandchildren's indigeneity will be respected and protected. Any organization or leader claiming to uphold truth and reconciliation must denounce any infringements, the statement adds. The statement was issued on Tuesday after Vancouver Island University announced Turpel Lapont had returned a 2013 honorary doctorate of laws. The school had told her it was under review due to requests from the collective and members of the university community. Reached by phone on Wednesday, Turpel Lafond declined to comment on the calls for her honorary degrees to be revoked or the university's review processes. She previously told the CBC that while she was growing up, she didn't question the biological parentage of her father, who she has said was Cree. Turpel Lafond served as British Columbia's representative for children and youth, and until last month, she was a tenured law professor at the University of BC. Until last year, she also served as the academic director of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center at the university. In addition to the CBC investigation, Dick said Turpel Lafond's evasion in response to questions about her heritage have contributed to Dick's conclusion that she is not Indigenous, with status recognized by the federal government. It would have been so easy for her to prove her identity if she's claiming to be a Treaty Cree Indian. All she had to do was pull out her treaty card. Along with revoking Turpel Lafond's honorary degrees, Dick said she wants to see the universities take a stand, stating publicly, it's wrong and unacceptable to pretend to be Indigenous, and there should be consequences such as termination. The University of Regina, along with Carleton, McGill, Brock, Royal Roads, Mount St. Vincent, and St. Thomas universities have all confirmed they've taken steps to look into Turpel Lafond's case. A statement from Simon Fraser University said a committee had been formed to put a policy in place that includes procedures for revoking an honorary degree. It said once that policy is approved, the university will determine the next steps. Responses haven't been received from Thompson Rivers and York universities. Interesting. Thompson Rivers University, hardly a university, is here in Kamloops, and so it has a very high percentage of Native or Indigenous students. So it's interesting that that was one of the ones that had not responded, at least at the time that this article was written back in January. So, a few comments to make about this. First of all, I'm not stunned. All these bigwigs are stunned, but I'm not stunned. And I have a suspicion a lot of people aren't really all that stunned by this story. It's not really the first example of somebody pretending, falsely claiming, lying, essentially, to have to have ancestry that is native, and in fact that they're not. Now, probably the biggest, highest profile example that comes to mind immediately of that would be the Democrat politician in the United States. She was a presidential candidate. What's her name? I can't think of her name now. I can't think of her name because I can only think of that Trump calls her Pocahontas, as a faux, as in false, like F-A-U-X. As opposed to Pocahontas. What's her actual name? Oh my goodness, now I have to look that up. What is Pocahontas's real name? Oh my god. Pocahontas. I'm sure it'll tell us. Just go like that. There she is. What's her name? Elizabeth Warren. So she's somebody who claimed to have Native ancestry in the United States. And much like this case with Mary Ellen Turpel Lafond, she used that to benefit her career. okay, to get awards and scholarships. It was a way for her to benefit and to her career benefited from it. That was why she was. That would be the motive, okay, for making these lies, spreading these lies about one's ancestry. And so, but there's been other cases too. There's actually been several cases. That's just the highest profile. There's also cases where people have claimed falsely to be Black. And there was somebody who was a high profile activist for Black people in the United States, African Americans, and that this person was found to be lying and was not, in fact, Black. So it's not really the first time that this has happened, so I wouldn't be all that stunned by it. Um, Now, why do you suppose that this is happening? Well, what it reminds me of, because I grew up watching the Oprah Winfrey Show, and I remember, like, probably back in the 80s, I remember Oprah did a show on the whole topic. What they called was passing. Passing was the lingo that was used. And what that was talking about was, you know, in the past, so this show was in the past in the 80s, but in the past from then, so like decades before then, in the earlier part of the 20th century, that it was quite a common practice for Black people in the United States, African Americans, to pretend to be white. Now, maybe not fully Black people, maybe they were half Black or a quarter Black or something like that. But if they were light-skinned enough, sufficiently light-skinned, but still a black person, but sufficiently light-skinned that they could pass as white, then some would do that because of the benefits that would accrue to them if society perceived them as white. And so this was, an example of the real systemic, that I mean, the word systemic definitely applies in that case. Systemic racism that Black people in the United States faced during the 20th century, where it would be of someone's benefit if they're Black to let people think that they're white because of all the benefits that would flow from that. Now, right, whereas if people perceived them as they actually were, as Black, then they wouldn't get that, they'd lose out on all those benefits. That truly is an example of so-called white privilege, which is a concept I'm very critical of, skeptical of. But I mean, certainly in the past, in the United States, it did exist. Maybe not now, but it did exist in the past. And that Oprah show talking about Black people passing, and that's why they use the term passing, passing themselves off as white. Their motive was to experience the benefits of white privilege in a systemically racist country as the United States was at that time. Okay, so now we have a bit of a role reversal here. We have instead of non-white people passing as white, we have the opposite thing happen. We have white people passing as being non-white. Same motive though. It's to get benefits. It's to advance someone's career. So isn't this just such a powerful demonstration that there really is no such thing as white privilege, at least in Canada, in today's context, in the 21st century? This is happening in the 21st century. So, to claim that white privilege is a thing, that it exists, that white people are privileged simply due to their white skin color and ancestry, and that this is systemic privilege across the board, um, like that simply doesn't hold up to the empirical reality. Well, then why would we have white people, pretending to not be white? If it's such a privilege that comes with being white, why would they want to renounce those privileges? Well, they don't want to renounce privileges. They want to be privileged, and they're seeing that the way to get privilege or to get status or to advance their career is through pretending to be non-white, specifically pretending to be Indigenous or Native, as was the case with Mary Ellen Turpel Lafont. Okay, so I really think that this is a real shows that just all this rhetoric that we're hearing that's really gone mainstream, and it's from the woke side, but it's gone mainstream about white privilege. I mean, maybe it was a thing in the past. Certainly, I think it was, but not anymore. The fact that this is happening and that this isn't just a one-off, it's happening quite a bit, is shows to me that no, there's actually more of a privilege associated with being Indigenous than there is with being white. And that certainly resonates with my experiences. I mean, just as someone who's struggling with housing, like the housing options available to me in the province of British Columbia would be so much greater if I simply were Indigenous, as that is currently defined. So that's, I think, the biggest takeaway from this. It just makes a mockery of the whole idea of white privilege, or that, by the same token, that Indigenous people are somehow underprivileged. It just makes a mockery of that. Because there would be no reason for somebody to pretend to be Indigenous unless they were getting something out of it. So there can be no privilege associated with being white. So yeah, I would also like to question some other things. So Canadians know now Indigenous women are more likely to face violence, more likely to be murdered, made missing, and she's used that identity to enhance her curriculum vitae, right? Like even the senator, Indigenous senator herself, is saying she used that identity to enhance her curriculum vitae. Like that was the motive. So to get privilege, to enhance her curriculum vitae, resume, to build up her resume, to puff up her resume, she claimed to be Indigenous. That was the motive. Okay. But I would like to question the first part of that sentence. Canadians know now. Well, I'm a Canadian, and I don't really know this to be true, that Indigenous women are more likely to face violence, more likely to be murdered, made missing. Really? They are? They are more likely than compared to who? Who are you comparing? Who are you comparing it to? First of all, I guess I have to ask that. Are you, because it says Indigenous women are more likely. More like, are they comparing that to Indigenous men? It could be. I mean, there's part of the sentence is missing here, but like, what is the comparison point? Or are they saying the Indigenous part is the relevant part, so that Indigenous people, women or men, would be more likely to face violence, murdered, made missing, blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't know either one of those cases to be true, that it's Indigenous or that it's women who are more likely to face those things. I really don't know that to be the case. So I don't like it to be said that Canadians now know this. I don't know this to be a fact. I know that the violence that men experience is very much underreported. And I know that the vast majority of homeless people in Vancouver are, in fact, men. So I would question that women are getting such a raw deal here in comparison to other groups when men are really having a tough go of it. And then the Indigenous part, well, which I think that's probably the more relevant category in this article. Well, I don't know that to be true. Now, it could be true that Indigenous are more likely to face violence, more likely to be murdered, made missing. I don't know. I want to see the stats, though. I'm not going to just go off of this and say that that's true. I know that there's been several cases of, like, high-profile cases of street prostitutes in BC being murdered and going missing. The missing women epidemic has been truly a crime against humanity, the amount of missing women in the province of BC. And the Willie Pickton case was a high-profile case where this pig farmer in suburban Vancouver would go into downtown Vancouver, the east side, and pick up prostitutes, take them back to his pig farm, and murder them, and then put them through the rendering equipment for the processing of the pork. Oh my God, it was like, what a horror story that was. But the way that has been remembered and celebrated, I've certainly, well, not celebrated, but remembered, memorialized. There's many memorials in Vancouver. And the way that it's been talked about in the media, it's always made to talk about the victims were Indigenous. The victims of Willie Pickton were Indigenous. Look at this horrible thing that happened to Indigenous women. Now, certainly a lot of his victims were Indigenous, but not all of them. I don't even know if the majority of them were. But I mean, to talk to a young person now, the way that story has been portrayed, you would practically think that all of them were Indigenous. All the victims of Willie Pickton were Indigenous. No, they weren't. I don't even know if it was a majority. A lot of the victims were actually white. women, white prostitutes, or other races too, black and other races. I mean, he had victims of many different races. But as that story has been memorialized and talked about, it seems that the other races of victims have just all but been forgotten, and it's been socially constructed as an Indigenous issue. Whereas Indigenous women were certainly among the victims, probably I would say it's a fair bet to say that they were disproportionately victimized, yes, but not even that the majority of the victims were Indigenous. So this kind of talk really runs the risk of erasing from view and rendering invisible other identity categories that experience victimization. Okay, so that's what I would say in response to that little sentence right there. So no, I'm a Canadian, and I actually don't know that to be true. And the other thing I wanted to say is, so I really have a problem. It's interesting that in this article, this super politically correct article, that the word Indian comes up quite a bit, and so that's good. Uh, it's a word that is still in usage in Canada due to legal reasons. For instance, the director of the Indian Residential School History and Dialogue Center at the university, that they would use that word Indian in the name of the center at UBC, which is like a bastion of political correctness. So it just goes to show that that word is still has currency. And whereas the other word that's being floated around is Indigenous. Now, I just wanted to say it's not something I really get into very often. I would say that I am Indigenous, and I'm not pretending about it. I'm not pretending when I say that. But I would also say that I'm white. So, yeah, I'm a white person and I'm Indigenous, and that is not a contradiction. Most people would probably think that it is, but it's not, because according to the United Nations, if your family or community has lived in a certain region for at least 400 years, then you are considered Indigenous to that region. Well, I've traced my ancestry in North America going back further than 400 years. So by the United Nations, I would be considered Indigenous. I'm talking about my white settler family roots going back in North America more than 400 years. So I am Indigenous and I don't need to have a drop of Native blood in me to qualify. Now, that doesn't mean that I would qualify as Indigenous under Canada's legal regime in terms of being a status Indian. No, I would not, and I would not claim to be that. But this other word that's being floated around, Indigenous, is less precise of a category. It's not a legal word, like you're either a status Indian or not. Well, Indigenous is more of an identity category. It's not actually a legal term, not yet in Canada, at least. And it's a word that's relatively recent to our lexicon. And I really have I think it's a problematic term. Indigenous is invasive. So every time we use that word Indigenous, like it's very, it implies anybody else who's not Indigenous, by definition, is an invader. And I find that problematic. Like, I'm not an invader. I was born in Canada, and I have ancestors in Canada and the United States, in North America, going back 400 years. So it's quite offensive to me to be regarded as an invader, or for it to even be implied that I would be an invader or that I would be invasive in some way. No, I'm in the country where I was born, and I'm not, in fact, an invader. So that's why I don't really like using the word Indigenous, because it's like calling myself, and not just myself, like everybody else who's around me, immigrants and people who are born here, just everyone who's not Native, it's like calling those people invaders. And that to me is rude and also inaccurate. So I tend to use the word Native or Aboriginal when I'm talking about these issues. That's my preferred terms. And so what else did I want to say about that? Right? And like Oh, reconciliation. It mentioned something in this article about reconciliation. So supposedly Canada has had a reconciliation process between Indigenous, so-called Indigenous groups and the larger, broader Canadian society. I would like to say, no, it hasn't. There is, in fact, no reconciliation, despite all the fanfare made by the politicians and the media, because reconciliation, like the two first letters of that word, re, means it's a two-way street. Like has to have some kind of reciprocity to it. So this process has been more like top down and imposed on people. But like, first of all, there has to be open dialogue and free speech in like as a prerequisite for any reconciliation on any topic. Like, you know, like say we're talking about a marriage that broke apart, a husband and a wife, they're getting a divorce, but then they come together and they decide that they don't want to have a divorce after all. They're going to reconcile and save their marriage. That's a type of a reconciliation right there. But of course, that is a two-way street. In order for that to work, both the husband and the wife both have to be speaking on speaking terms with each other and have to come to some kind of an agreement. Uh, okay, so we don't have that situation in Canada because essentially we don't have free speech. So, you know, at least one side, perhaps both sides, but I'm not going to speak for the other side, but at least one side of this equation has not had free speech. Like white people, so-called settler people, have not been able to speak honestly about the kinds of things that are on our minds when it comes to this, because we will be censored and effectively shut out from this process. So that means, how can there be reconciliation? It's not a reconciliation if at least one side, perhaps both sides. I mean, probably I bet a lot of Native people would say that they have this problem too, and that they felt left out from the reconciliation process and that they didn't have a chance to speak about it. Probably that would be true, but I'm not going to speak for them. But at the very least, the white people side has not had that. So it's not a reconciliation then. There is no reconciliation. If there's no free speech, there like it's impossible to have reconciliation without free speech, and we don't have free speech. So that's all I have to say about that. And I just think it makes such a mockery of political correctness. And a lot of people in the comment section, by the way, and these are the comments that managed to get through that weren't censored, have similar thoughts as I do. So yeah, just wanted to say that, and maybe I'll have some more thoughts later on, but that's it for now. Peace out for now.
Hello, it's Asteria with a reading for the collective.
The Thanksgiving that I spent. So I just want to talk a little bit about the Thanksgiving, when my bitrate gets back, the Thanksgiving that I spent in the 1980s at the Musqueam Reserve in Vancouver. So I better record this because the bit heads out often during the most important parts of whatever I'm saying. Okay, so this is a happy memory. Like, this was a positive event. I think for everyone who was there. But somehow this positive event, this happy time from my childhood, people are having very weird reactions to it. In nowadays, when I talk about it, I've had people accuse me of lying, of making it up straight up. It's a fabricated story. It's not. It's not. And really, I mean, if somebody has a problem with the fact that my family spent Thanksgiving at the Musqueam Reserve, then take it up with the people who invited us there, who was Jerry Sparrow, the daughter of the chief. She invited us to her house for Thanksgiving. And it was back in the 80s. And there was a big dinner. And yes, it was salmon. It was not turkey. They did not. We did not cook a turkey there. Jerry did not cook. I don't believe she did. I mean, as far as I remember that it was salmon that we were eating. I remember there was pumpkin pie, which is a traditional food to have on Thanksgiving. Pumpkin pie, yes. But I mean, salmon would be the main thing that you would be eating because it was plentiful. You'd have to pay for a turkey. It would be expensive. But salmon was something that, I mean, Jerry's sons would catch the fish out of the Fraser River. And my parents, white parents, would go there, not just only on Thanksgiving, any time. They would go there, well, not any time. I mean, when the salmon are coming back to spawn, so it's a certain time of year, like towards the end of summer. My parents would go there to buy salmon. You know, like she was one of this Jerry Sparrow was one of my parents' friends. Okay, because I've talked before about how a lot of my childhood I spent in Richmond, okay, which is right next to Vancouver, at a blueberry farm. Okay, back in the 80s, just about half of Richmond was farms. I mean, it still is. A lot of it is still farmland. That blueberry farm is still there as a farm. But my parents had a friend who, he was a renter. He rented a house on the farm. And so part of the deal of renting it, though, was that he was like responsible for the whole farm. And so it was this huge blueberry farm. I mean, I think before him there was other hippies who lived there before him. And so my parents would go there. It was a place for them to party. They would drink and stuff. And the kids would be there. Like, I wasn't the only kid. Other people brought their kids there. And we'd run amok on the land of the blueberry farm. And I knew that farm by the back of my hand. And it was all the blueberries you could eat. And then on Labor Day, every Labor Day, there would be a huge party there. The party would happen whether this guy, I mean, his name was Jim, whether he wanted it to or not. I mean, it was a tradition for all these hippies to have a big party at the blueberry farm every Labor Day Sunday. And there'd be a band, and there was a guy that showed up with horse and carriage, and it would take the kids around for horse rides, and it would go all through the night, this party. And there was one house on the property that nobody was living in, and it was told, okay, that's for the kids to sleep in. I mean, I don't remember really sleeping, but I mean, so there was one house dedicated for the kids. So we'd just be running amok, having a great time. You know, I mean, kids nowadays don't get to do that. And I mean, that's an important part of your childhood, I think. So sometimes I talk about that because people think, oh, I'm from Vancouver, I grew up in Vancouver, that I grew up in the city. But a lot of my childhood was spent on a farm, okay? And there's a whole bunch of different people who would go to that farm, and one of the people who went there was this woman named Jerry Sparrow, who is from the Musqueam Reserve, and I believe she was the daughter of the chief of the Musqueam band. I don't know his first name, but was her father. I mean, there's a lot of people at the Musqueam band with the last name of Sparrow. And I think there's been a few chiefs with the last name of Sparrow. So this Jerry woman was part of that family, but she was also a friend of Jim, who was a white guy who had the blueberry farm, and then my parents, they were all part of this circle of friends. And one year, Jerry invited my family over to her place for Thanksgiving. And the other people were there too. I'm pretty sure Jim was probably there, and other people were there. And so we went. Wasn't really a big deal. It was just a dinner, really, at somebody's house. But it was a big deal in the sense that, I mean, it would have been one of only a handful of times that I've ever been to the Musqueam Reserve, because generally speaking, I mean, you wouldn't go there unless you were invited. I get shocked in Kamloops how white people just go to the reserve over here, the Indian Reserve. Like, really? You're just going to go there? Like, to my mind, you have to be invited. And, like in Vancouver, definitely you have to be invited. People, generally speaking, in Vancouver don't go wandering into the Musqueam Reserve, okay? But if you're invited by someone who lives there to their home, what, you're not supposed to go? You're not supposed to go because they're native? Wouldn't that be racist? Like, no, we went. And had a dinner. And that was it. And yeah, and it was very West Coast because there was no turkey, there was salmon instead. And I do remember, it wasn't the only time I was at the Musqueam Reserve though, because I do remember going there on another time when we were buying the salmon, so like with my parents. I mean, probably a few times like that. And I also remember that the very, 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 very first protest, like political protest, that I ever went to was something involving this Jerry Sparrow, because, okay, you know, the big park next to UBC it's now called I think it's called Pacific Spirit Regional Park, something like that. But the people from the Musqueam Band were protesting that. To my memory, they're protesting that because they didn't want it to be called that. I don't know what it used to be called, but they wanted the name to change, to stay as to whatever it was before, which was probably a name that was something to do with Musqueam culture. It was probably a Musqueam word as the name of the park. I don't know that for sure. I don't know what the name used to be, but I just know that they were opposed to the renaming of the park to be called Pacific Spirit Regional Park, and that there was a protest for that. And that would have been right next to, the protest would have been like right by this park, which is right by the Musqueam Reserve. So technically that wasn't on the reserve land though, I don't think. And this is all happening, of course, right by UBC, University of British Columbia. Okay. And I grew up in the Marpole neighborhood, which is not too far from there, but I mean, it starts to get to be a little bit more of a rural feel when you get out in that part of Vancouver. I mean, there's actually people who, even nowadays, I believe, not on the reserve, but just the surrounding neighborhoods, sometimes you'll see people riding horses, like in the middle of the street. Okay? So it's kind of almost like has a rural vibe to it. It's like a weird little part of Vancouver. And, you know, technically it's not even part of the city of Vancouver. If it's part of the reserve land, or UBC itself, it's also technically not part of Vancouver. Okay, but for all intents and purposes it is. It's all attached. But so this is something that happened in the 1980s. One time that my family went to Jerry Sparrow's house for Thanksgiving on the Musqueam Reserve. Okay? And we went because we were invited guests of the daughter of the chief. So if somebody has a problem with that, take it up with Jerry Sparrow. She was the one who invited us. And in terms of what I wrote right here, I mean, okay, well, let's just read it. Growing up in Vancouver in the 80s in a white working class family, I never ate salmon purchased from a grocery store. No, never ate salmon purchased from a grocery store. That would be a waste of money. Instead, every summer when the salmon would return to spawn in the Fraser River, we would go to the Musqueam Reserve and buy contraband salmon caught by the natives. I remember they kept it in a deep freezer outside, and there were all these flies swarming around. The natives weren't allowed to sell the salmon. Like, why not? It's so ridiculous. But they weren't. But they did anyways, and we were happy to buy it from them at a steep discount. That was the only way I ever ate salmon as a child, aside from canned salmon. Okay, so I did eat canned salmon, purchased at a grocery store. But in terms of like an actual salmon that looks like a fish, no, the only time I ever had that would have been when my parents were buying it from at the Musqueam Reserve. My parents had friends who lived on the Musqueam Reserve. We even spent a Thanksgiving on the Musqueam Reserve. Now that I think back to it, it was like a 1980s version of the Pilgrims and the Natives at Thanksgiving. I was too young to appreciate that at the time. Whites and natives got along, probably because we were all of similar class background, working, not wealthy, not particularly well educated, similar jargon and speech. They all drank together and smoked pot together, and they all made politically incorrect jokes and even racist jokes, and they all laughed together, whites and natives alike. Okay, yeah, that's how it went down. I mean, not only at that time, but other times. I mean, there were several native people that were part of this circle of friends, and I mean, it just wasn't like today, like where people are so on edge. Like I wasn't even aware of any kind of big division between white people and native people. Back in the 80s as a child, I wasn't even aware. I just to clarify, so none of these people, they would make jokes and talk about things that would be considered politically incorrect or racist by today's standard. I mean, these were kind of a rough crowd of people. They weren't really the type to mince words, and they weren't really watching what they would say. But that being said, I don't think anyone was trying to be racist. Like, if somebody actually would have said something that was outright racist, like intending to be rude and make a dig at someone based on their race, I don't think that would have been tolerated. No. But that's not what was happening. These people were all friends. And so, I mean, there could have been jokes made at white people's expense. There could have been jokes made about native people, but they were just all joking around, drinking, and it just wasn't a big deal. People understood the intention of it was humor, and it wasn't meant to put anyone down. If there was actually somebody being actually rude like that, if that would have ever happened, I don't remember it ever happening, but I'm sure that would not have been tolerated. None of these people, whether you're talking about the whites or the natives, none of these people were exactly pushovers. They all knew how to defend themselves. So if somebody was out of line, misbehaving, that would have been dealt with. That would have been corrected. People didn't put up with bullshit. But people also were not looking to be offended. They weren't super sensitive either, like how things are today. So that was the point of telling that story. It's a positive memory in my mind, and I don't feel that I should be ashamed. And if you have a problem with it, take it up with this daughter of the chief who invited my family to her house on the Musqueam Reserve for Thanksgiving dinner back in the 80s. So, just wanted to say that. All right, peace out. Hello, YouTube and Kick Worlds. So, I'm doing another live stream about Vancouver.
Faculty and the university to the table to look for ways to cut costs. Those cuts could include layoffs and changes to programming.
course, the idea of faculty layoffs and the idea of having people lose their jobs and/or affecting the type of programming we can offer at the university is of course cuts to the core of what professors care about.
Peter Miller says the union agreement requires 2 years of a deficit before financial exigency can be enacted. He says this issue, coupled with a recent cut to department budgets, a hiring freeze, and the elimination of the women's soccer program and English language program, has created concern and uncertainty among staff. The Canadian Association of University Teachers says U of W isn't the only post-secondary institution with financial problems.
You are seeing this across the country, so it's not unique to Manitoba or the University of Winnipeg, but it's driven by a number of factors, including international students, but also just underfunding of universities more generally.
Peter McInnes says declaring financial exigency can compromise the reputation of an institution. Miller doesn't think it will be needed.
This is all based around enrollment numbers that, frankly put, nobody knows what they will be.
A spokesperson for the University of Winnipeg says it's not considering financial exigency. The school says it would only be a last resort under far more serious circumstances. Mike Arsenault, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Okay, so that was pretty brief. It's because these universities have been relying on international students who pay way more in tuition than a domestic student does, because a domestic student only pays a portion of the cost. The rest of it ends up being subsidized by the government. Okay, as high as tuition is, like when I went to university, my tuition would have been usually almost $2,000 a semester. Okay, but that would have only actually been a portion of the total cost, what it actually costs to run those programs for me to be there. So, but whereas an international student has to pay the full cost, they don't get a subsidy, and there's been a cut in the number of international students that Canada is taking in at the federal level, right? The federal Liberals have reduced the amount. I mean, we're still taking in large numbers, but they've reduced the number of immigrants that are being allowed into the country, and part of those measures has also been reducing international students, who technically speaking are not immigrants because they're not coming to Canada to live permanently. Some of them do end up doing that, but that's not the stated intention when somebody is applying for a visa to come to enter Canada as an international student. But my understanding is that the number of international students that Canada is allowing into the country is going down, has been reduced. Okay, so that would be what is precipitating this crisis. But I mean, I would argue that these universities should not have been relying on international students to make ends meet in the first place. I mean, we've seen how I've seen how that has really undermined the quality of education and the experience of being in university. Okay, but I believe that Canadian public universities, that's what we're talking about here, public universities, should primarily be oriented towards serving the Canadian public, okay, not international students. And so I'm happy that there's the number of international students is being reduced, and I think that the financial crisis that's exposing in these universities, it's been masked. These universities have been have not been financially well managed for a long time, but they've been able to paper over that with international student enrollment. And I believe it was the man speaking from the university was saying there's a problem with my internet. Where did my internet go? Hopefully we didn't lose the live stream. I don't know why there's such a horrible problem with my internet connection today. But what I was just saying is that what was I was trying to. I totally lost my train of thought now. Fuck. No. No. Right. The guy from the union was saying that there's a problem with underfunding of universities, and so I would say no, no. That sounds to me like positioning to get these universities to ask for cash, more money, more transfers, more subsidies coming from governments, and I really don't think that that is appropriate. Now, these Canadian public universities really are not being run with the public interest of Canada in mind. So why should the Canadian public be spending money on these universities? It's giving subsidies to universities that are totally opposed to that very same Canadian public, that they're asking for money from. I mean, the reality is when I got out of university, I mean, overall, I'm glad that I went, but I was brainwashed. I went to two public universities. I went to Simon Fraser University in Burnaby and the University of British Columbia. Before that I went to some community colleges. So I started in 2003 and I finished at the very end of 2010. And during those years, I mean, I was brainwashed. And it took several years after I got out of university to deprogram myself. And a concerted effort. I had to really, I mean, I give credit to the Zero Hedge website, but specifically the comments section back around 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, say those years, before it was censored. Like now the comment section over there is heavily censored, but when it was truly a forum for free speech, like there were a lot of comments that helped me get past my brainwashing, because I also didn't want to, I learned a lot and I didn't want to dispense with the valuable stuff that I got from university, but I did need to shed myself of the brainwashing. I mean, let's just not beat around the bush. The brainwashing was, I was indoctrinated with anti-white racism. I was made to believe that the most important category of social inequality in our society today, would revolve around identity politics, but specifically race, and that that white privilege is just so infused in our society that that our whole society is structured around that any kind of inequality, you have to look at it through that racial lens. That is how I was indoctrinated. And I knew all along that that wasn't true, because, I mean, you can only indoctrinate someone so much when, I am white and I come from a pretty difficult financial background. My parents have never had money. They've been struggling financially their whole lives. And but my dad's been working, breaking his back his whole life, so it's not because of lack of work. And I just knew, I did always know that it was BS, but when it's in your environment for 7 years, you do internalize a lot of it. You do. And and even if I knew that it was wrong, it was hard for me to articulate that and to really like conceptualize like what was wrong and what parts of it may have been right. Like, so I had to put a lot of effort into deprogramming myself from all that. And like that is not, that doesn't serve me, that doesn't serve the public, that doesn't serve the Canadian public to be pumping out all these students, graduates, who have this worldview that is heavily racist. I mean, that's what it is. They are. It's a racist worldview. It's racist against white people. It's also sexist against men. It's also biased against heterosexual people, or even people who are able-bodied would be looked down upon in a negative light, according to this identity politics that I was brainwashed with when I was in university. And I mean, it's not like I was an exception. This is the standard fare of universities in Canada for a few decades now. Okay, and that's what's given us things like, I mean, not only in Canada, but I mean, it goes on in the United States as well. I mean, look at how so many American cities got ripped apart, burnt down, set on fire in 2018. And how many people got attacked? People were getting attacked. People were getting attacked for wearing MAGA hats and such. Like, that has been, to a large degree, is the outcome of universities. That kind of violence. And Canada has not escaped it altogether either. It's been a bit lower profile, but there have been many violent protests in Canada as well. And a lot of it in Canada, the protests would have to do with being opposed to the oil sector in Alberta and other provinces, and being opposed to any pipelines. So, you know, this has had a very harmful impact on Canada's economy. Yet that's the same economy that these universities are now going to be asking for a handout from. So, you know, the Canadian public universities in so many ways are just at odds with what's in the best interests of Canada. They just simply don't care. And they're often like have animosity towards what's in the best interests of Canadians in Canada. So I don't think that Canada should be helping that, right? Like Canada needs to look out for its own best interests. So we don't need to be funding institutions that are trying to sow social discord in Canada, or that are trying to undermine the Canadian economy. And that is what Canadian public universities have been doing for quite a long time. You know, they're actively racist also in their hiring practices, many of these universities. I'll just say about my experience. So when I was in Simon Fraser University, I was on student loans, right? I didn't have a lot of money, and student loans doesn't cover all your expenses, so you have to find a way of bridging that shortfall. I mean, working would be one of the prime ways of doing it. And so I was looking for work, and there's several jobs at Simon Fraser University on the campus, and any jobs on campus are union jobs, like automatically, and so they pay quite a good wage, better than what I had been used to, because I've basically only ever worked minimum wage jobs my whole life at that point. But now that I was at SFU, I thought it would be an opportunity to get into it was just a part-time job, but still, at least to get into a union job where I would get a higher hourly wage than what I traditionally earned. And, I was involved with student politics. I was part of the geography student union. And I knew a lot of connected people in university life, like other students just. And there was this job. I can't even remember what the job was, and honestly, it doesn't even matter what it was. But I was a shoe-in for it, and I knew someone who knew the people who were on the hiring committee, and she was telling me, that I probably would have a good chance of getting it, and I did I went for an interview, and it seemed to go quite well. I thought I was going to get the job, and as it turned out, I did not get the job. And it went to an international student instead. And my friend, who was this insider in the student union and who had inside knowledge about the hiring committee's practices and decision making, told me under confidence. It was a secret. She wasn't allowed to tell me this, but she told me it anyways. That she told me that it was the policy to if there's two equal candidates and they're trying to decide between two equal candidates who to hire, they're going to give preference to an international student, because international students, as per their visa that they're on in Canada, they're not actually allowed to work except on campus. That's the one exception. So if you're in Canada on an international student visa, you're not allowed to work because you're not here for working. You can't just apply for jobs all over the place and get a job somewhere. You can't do that, with the exception of on campus, the campus of the school that you're enrolled in study at. You can apply and take a job there. And so because they weren't allowed to work anywhere off campus, it was the student union's practice policy to give preferential hiring preference to international students. But that's so unfair, because like I say, all the jobs on campus are union, and generally speaking, jobs off campus for the most part are not union. And we're, like I say, at that point I'd only ever made minimum wage, or maybe a little bit more. And I think that's terrible, and that's kind of thing happens all the time. And I believe at UBC, the international students actually created their own separate building. I believe there was some politics around that, but there's a separate student union building or student commons building just for international students. So they've been they're quite active in terms of advocating for their best interests, these international students, and it just seems to be that the domestic students' needs just get pushed to the side. And I think another thing to take into consideration is that Canada has a very serious housing crisis, right? The cost of housing is just so insane. And international students have made that worse, and so I think it's really irresponsible for universities to be relying on making ends meet financially. They're relying on these international students, but they're not providing enough housing on campus to house these international students that they rely on. So that means some of these international students are looking for housing in the private rental market, right? And so they're in competition with me and everybody else. Even in Kamloops, there's the Thompson Rivers University. Yeah, if these international students take up a lot of the rental housing, they also take up a lot of hotel rooms, and many landlords give preferential treatment to international students. They'd rather rent to an international student than a Canadian. I've been told that outright by several hotels. I've called around, because my hotel isn't the best conditions physically, but it's also very expensive. And so I've called around town to see if I could get into a cheaper hotel room, and I've been told at literally every hotel that I called, told me that they do not rent to people who live in Kamloops permanently. The only, like, because I'm not on vacation, right? Like, if I'm looking for either a weekly or a monthly rate, not a daily rate, so a weekly or a monthly rate, and the hotels, all of them have told me that we only offer weekly or monthly rates to people who are here on a temporary basis, either for work or or students. So they're here in town temporarily as students. Yeah, that would be mainly international students. Okay, so, but if you just are somebody who just permanently lives in this town, you're out of luck. They're not going to rent to you. I don't know if it's legal or not, but that's what they do. And nobody, I've said this, by the way, to so many people. I've said this to even to housing agencies in town in Kamloops. Nobody really seems to bat an eye, but nobody seems shocked. Like, they don't seem upset about it, but they also don't, they're not shocked. They're not like thinking I'm lying. They know it's true. But it's just kind of an accepted thing. Like, it's kind of weird. So yeah, like, but I mean, how terrible that is. So international students are making the housing crisis that much worse for low-income renters in Canada. And why are they here, these international students? What good do they serve for Canada? Well, the only good that they serve is, I guess, making it so that these Canadian universities can make their budgets. So I guess they're helping to keep professors and university staff employed. So those are, generally speaking, more of a privileged, upper middle class group of people. So those people, they're getting their job stability based on international students, which are making it harder for the poor to find housing. That's how we're keeping these privileged professors in work. Like, I mean, doesn't that seem wrong? Doesn't that seem wrong? I mean, they're already privileged. They're not, the professors aren't struggling with rental housing for the most part. Okay, but so the way that they're keeping their jobs is by bringing in these people who are making it harder for the poor who are here. Like, that doesn't seem right to me. And speaking of professors as well, I also think there's a huge problem with tenure track positions. So when you are a tenured professor, you basically can't be fired, and you can basically do whatever you want for the, like, within reason. Like, they don't need to teach. They can focus on research, and they can take sabbaticals, so they can take, which means basically taking time off and still get paid. Like, they can do what they want for the most part if they have tenure. It takes a long time to get tenure. Most professors are not actually tenured. Most of them would be, maybe you would call tenure track, so they're on track to be tenured. But still, there's a lot of privileges with that too. And like, they're so quick to call out the alleged social privilege of white people and men, these professors. But what about them? What about their privilege? Like, isn't tenure, like the fact that you're a tenured or even a tenure track, and that you can be beyond reproach, and you can just not even have to teach, you can take sabbaticals and make your 6-figure income? Like, how is that? Like, that's privileged. That's privileged. But they don't like to have the spotlight being shone on their privilege, even as they're calling out the privilege of people who actually have a lot less than they do. And so, but this is the only, I've thought for a long time that Canadian universities need to be defunded, along the lines like CBC, which is totally outrageous in terms of their hostility towards I guess I would just have to say Canadians, people born in Canada as opposed to immigrants. Like, I mean, look at the censorship that I've experienced. I mean, or maybe it's not even just that. Who knows what their bias is exactly? But they have a big. I don't think that they are serving the public interest. CBC, like what, because why would they censor my comments about the election in BC? Like, that would be the kind of thing that I would think that kind of lively discussion that would be right up their alley. That's what their raison d'etre is, but they censor that. So, a lot of people, I don't need to explain what's the problem with CBC. I mean, a lot of people understand that there is a problem with CBC, and it is a great deal of populist sentiment in Canada is to defund CBC, and that is a hashtag on Twitter because a lot of people believe that should be done. But the same line of thinking with defunding CBC should be applied to Canadian universities. That's something I've called for in the past. Defund academia. It's the only thing that they understand is money. Everything I'm saying, any kind of argumentation or criticism of their practices, they'll censor it. They won't even hear it because it'll be censored. But they would agree with that. See, that's another thing is these universities do agree with censorship, but a lot of these professors, like I'm thinking about my David Lay, my professor David Lay at UBC. I mean, he had free speech when he was building up his academic career, when he was writing about gentrification and housing issues in the 70s and the 80s. He had free speech at that time to say whatever he felt was necessary, that was important to be said based on what he was seeing. Okay, but he would deny that to upcoming generations. The very thing that his career is based on, free speech, he would deny that to the upcoming generations of students. So, I really think that they need a wake-up call, these universities, but the only way they're going to get it is through financial hardship. So, I'm actually happy to see them experience financial crisis. And I certainly think that it would be totally inappropriate to increase the subsidies that are going to them. And, maybe it's about time that they cut the fat. There's a lot of fat at universities that can be cut out. There's a lot of staff positions that are unnecessary. I mean, the administration as well. I mean, I've been calling out professors, but administration is a big problem too. The administration of universities has grown tremendously, like multiples of times the number of administrative staff as a ratio to either students or professors. It's much higher now than it was ever in the past, and it's not necessary to have that much administration. But perhaps it is because of all of these politically correct policies and the policing of language that goes on in universities. That in itself creates administrative work, but it's not work that is actually doing any good. In fact, it could be doing a lot of harm. So, I would say cut your administrative costs, universities. Cut your professors' costs, eliminate tenure and tenure track positions entirely, and reorient yourselves to serving the public interest of Canada, which would mean domestic students first, not relying on international students to make ends meet, not taking in huge numbers of international students that are going to add to the housing crisis, and moving away from your really divisive rhetoric that is hostile towards white people, men, and heterosexual people. I think that would really help, because I mean, how many people are being turned off of even students or even not going to university because they find that it is so hostile to themselves, and they have to censor what they're self-censor what they say. They can't. I mean, a lot of people would say that they feel that they cannot speak their mind on a Canadian campus, and that's so that must be having an impact on enrollment, right? So I would say that they should be making those kinds of changes way before asking Canadian taxpayers, who they're so hostile towards, for additional money. All right, that's all I have to say for now. Peace out. Hello, YouTube world. Hello. So I assure you, YouTube, that this is all entirely copyright-free content that I'm going to be live streaming today. I want to talk about the royal visit currently underway in Canada, in Ottawa, by so-called King Charles III and Camilla. And I just have some imagery here to remind everyone, because it's been memory holed by the mainstream media, this scandal from the 80s when at that time he was the Prince Charles, said he wanted to be Camilla's tampon. So what did he say? And he was still married to Princess Diana at the time he said that. This meme here, "Long live King Tampax," is a transcript of what he said at the time. This was an audio recording. There's an audio recording of this phone conversation where Charles said, "Oh God, I'll just live inside your trousers or something. It would be much easier. Camilla, what are you going to turn into, a pair of knickers? Charles, or God forbid, a Tampax, just my luck. Camilla, you are a complete idiot. Oh, what a wonderful idea. Charles, my luck to be chucked down the lavatory and go on and on forever, swirling around on the top, never going down. Camilla, oh darling. Charles, until the next one comes through. Camilla, or perhaps you could come back as a box. Charles, what sort of box? Camilla, a box of Tampax, so you could just keep going." So they're both making these ridiculous comments. But, I mean, how disgusting. How disgusting. How unbecoming of someone who is supposed to be held in high honor to be talking like this. Especially a married man to a woman outside of his marriage. Just disgusting. And, I just have to remark, if there had been an audio recording from the 1980s involving Trump being involved in a conversation like this, I guarantee you that would be being blasted 24/7 by the mainstream media today. Okay? But in the case of Charles, it's been memory holed. It's very hard to find that recording online, and it's very hard to find news of it. And even these memes are we're just a handful. There's not a lot out there about this event. I just remember it because I'm an old bitch at this point, and I remember it at the time. It was on the news at the time. But a lot of people seem to have forgotten, and it's I mean, you could make the case that it is objectifying women, and I'm certain that case would be made if Trump made such remarks. had made such remarks. So, and we're seeing the mainstream media absolutely fawn over King Charles, and say that Canada is embracing, Canadians are cozying up. There's several mainstream media stories right now saying that Canadians are cozying up to King Charles as part of a backlash against Trump and Trump's rhetoric about Canada being the 51st state, which is just rhetoric. It's just Trump pushing buttons, right? And by Trump sure did Mark Carney a great favor with those remarks, because if it did create a backlash, it created a backlash against conservative Pierre Poilievre in this last election in Canada, and caused people to rally around the Liberals. So, you know, I mean, it's. I've heard, I've seen news stories in the media complaining that Trump is acting like a king, like that Trump is acting like some dictator who is king, and that is complaining about that. The mainstream media is complaining that he's acting like a king. Well, he's not a king. He's an elected president, but Canada does have a king who has a history of making these kinds of outrageous remarks, and that just gets swept under the rug. So I'm going to play a news clip for you, and then we're going to see what the mainstream media has to say in this news clip. I haven't watched the news clip or heard the news clip yet myself, so I'll be taking it in for the first time. And then we're going to take a look at the comments below, including my comment, but other comments as well. And I only took a quick glance at those. All right, let's do it.
The monarchy is front and center.
Okay, so that was actually quite a balanced report. Most of the reports that I've seen written don't, make it sound like Canadians are just in love with this guy. So that was actually quite refreshing. But let's just see. This is what I wrote. These are the comments, top comments. So here's my comment. Never forget how this so-called king said he wanted to be Camilla's tampon in an audio recording. If there was a recording of Trump making a similar remark, it would be on blast for all to hear 24/7. Absolutely. Now we have a comment from someone named Roger. We have the most powerful country in the world right beside us. It would be wise to strengthen our ties to U.S. before we fall. Okay, there's lots of interesting stuff here, but I can't let this live stream go on any longer. It's already been too long, so I'm going to cut it off right there, but I might do a part 2 at a later time. Okay, peace out. Happy Canada Day, y'all. And free speech, I do believe, is a fundamental Canadian value, and that's what I've been exercising today. So I'm very grateful to be Canadian at the end of the day and to have that. I do have that. I assert that I have it. Not just because I'm Canadian. I assert that because it's my inherent right as a human being. I believe all human beings, no matter what country they come from, have free speech. They should have free speech, and unfortunately most human beings don't, and so we have to, but we how we get it is through just by us taking it, asserting it, as I've done today. Alright, peace out.